Hello everyone. Today I'm doing something a bit different. Doing a chat with a good friend of mine, Tom Easdown, who runs French Plans, and we're going to be talking about chateaus and all sorts. So, Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so my name's Tom, as Dan said. I am managing director of French Plans. We're an architecture and planning consultancy, and have the privilege of working on some fantastic buildings all throughout France. So, let's see what the conversation has in store.
Right, yeah. So, as you know, on my channel and on your business, we are often, I don't know if confronted is the word, but we often meet people who are actually desirable of buying a French chateau. Why do you think foreign buyers are so interested by the French chateau?
Um, there's a whole range of reasons, isn't there? I guess the possibility of owning a bit of history. There's a lot of that. The grandeur of perhaps owning a property which is maybe out of financial reach in their home countries, so the US or the UK. The idea of being able to live that French kind of chatelaine or chateau lifestyle. I think all of that plays into it. Heritage, the actual building itself, the aspiration to renovate and put your stamp onto things. It's a really aspirational thing to want to do, and I think it's a really and it's kind of caught people's imagination in terms of that storytelling and the fairy tale kind of idea. And so yeah, it's definitely something which is, I guess, grown in popularity. Would you say over the last sort of 18 months, 2 years? Would you put on that length or?
Um, well, the initial foreign buyer hit was with the actual Escape to a Chateau. So was that like 15 years ago? Something like that. But that was on the English side. Now we have the American influx coming in with a lot of American buyers wanting to actually buy chateaus. So I think, yeah, over the last 18 months, but more the American side as opposed to the UK side.
When we talk to clients, and especially American clients who we work with on chateau projects, it's this idea of owning a property which is steeped in history and has been around a very long time, which perhaps isn't a possibility in the US necessarily, and also a property which is kind of embedded in the landscape and the setting, because it's not just the building. Quite often, it's the setting of these chateaus which really inspires people to live in them, renovate them, bring them up to 21st century living standards. So it's that whole kind of a wide spectrum of reasons, but it's definitely something we've seen an increase in work associated with chateau projects, and also large kind of manoir projects. Because I suppose we have four bands of chateau projects. I suppose the really protected, proper chateaux and monument historique kind of chateaus. Then you get the larger chateaus, which perhaps aren't protected but still have a place in local heritage. Then you have the smaller kind of manoir country houses, which might be protected because some of these are listed and protected. And then at the bottom of the pile, not no less important, are the kind of the larger manoirs, kind of large farmhouses, which they're all challenging. But sometimes the smaller ones are sometimes more interesting than bigger ones. Often you can do more with a smaller thing. But yeah, it's kind of such a vast range of properties that kind of come under the chateau umbrella, that I think people get drawn into just the fairy tale, the lifestyle, the idea of being able to live in one of these is quite appealing.
Let's say they need a slight fantastic side to it. We got several chateaus on. We got some Napoleonic chateaus, for example, where they're very square and symmetrical, very like Roman temple style, and they don't draw necessarily a lot of attention. As soon as they've got towers and that sort of side, there's got a lot more attention to it.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely, there's an element of that fairy tale whimsy that people quite kind of get drawn into. Yeah, you're right. The kind of the not standard, but the more, I guess, regular chateaus are not often as popular as the towered, turreted ones. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And while we're talking about fantasy, I imagine you meet a few clients who actually have got, let's say, the wrong idea.
Yeah, it's easy. I think people get wrapped up in this. kind of idea that well, the owning a chateau is an easy thing to do. I mean, it doesn't necessarily be difficult. It's not necessarily difficult. You can quite easily buy a chateau, right? But it's the difficulty comes then actually living in these buildings, which perhaps haven't been lived in for 30 years. Sometimes we had a client recently who purchased a chateau and it hadn't been lived in for 35 years, and so bringing that building up to spec requires a certain level of dedication and a certain level of foresight as well. Because if you're going into it with your eyes open, that's one thing. Just purchasing perhaps without having thinking about what work is required can sometimes end up souring the dream a little, because you're spending a huge amount of time working. Fortunately, our clients were quite perfectly aware of the kind of the problems they were taking on, and we're working with them to get to the point where almost bringing back the chateau to zero before we're doing anything else. But it's that understanding and that education piece that these, generally speaking, they're big buildings, and big buildings can deteriorate quite quickly because you're not seeing them all of the time. And also reasonable budget to get these buildings back up to what you'd consider a 21st century living. If you're moving from a city in the US or a city in the UK and expect a certain standard of living, you may not get that on day one of living in your chateau, perhaps.
The 1980s renovations for France.
Yeah, absolutely. It's some of the strange things that have happened to these buildings over time is amazing to see.
Talking about prices of chateaus, I find quite often that when looking at all the prices, I've got tons of files on different chateaus, and I find it almost stupid to go over €2 million on a chateau. There are certain cases, obviously, when it's got 100 hectares, or it's a very historical building, or in a certain place. But I think up to 1.5 million, you can still get some pretty decent choice.
Yeah, and for 1.5 million, I mean, you'd be probably looking for something which was, minimal effort to live in. You'd be wanting to move in and just live in it. You wouldn't necessarily wanting to be doing any work to something which was 1.5 million.
Exactly, yeah.
But at the 2 million mark, I mean, there probably shouldn't be that many available for 2 million in France, really.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, well, I know I am all the time, and it's and so I think there's a degree of kind of, there's an element of what the market thinks the property's worth, and then there's an element of what it's really worth underneath, which has a whole load of factors involved in it. And sometimes, yeah, you look at, as you've gone through videos in the past, look at a chateau for 2 million when actually it's nowhere near anything. Everything needs upgrading. And okay, if you're doing it purely on a square meterage price, then yeah, the numbers kind of add up to 2 million because these things are huge. But actually, would you pay 2 million for it? Don't know. Sometimes it's a difficult one, but definitely, the ones that are slightly lower, between the 1 million and 1.5 million mark, if you can get a chateau which is ready to move into, or has excellent business potential, or only needs a coat of paint, then you're going to get some fantastic properties for what effectively is a bargain quite a lot of the time.
Yeah, but even if it just needs a coat of paint, that's still a lot of paint.
It's still a lot of paint, and it's French paint too.
I was going to say, yeah, I've seen properties, and even at 1.5 million, I still think they still need some work on the energy efficiency side if you want to live there.
Yeah, I mean, the energy efficiency, the current energy performance regulations don't really fit with existing chateau buildings at all, do they? So
they don't really fit with lots of buildings, actually.
Well, yeah. So sometimes well, that's true. It's square peg, round hole kind of a problem, and you end up trying to, fit a solution to a building which doesn't really suit it sometimes, and so you have to take a bit of a pragmatic view to these thermal performance issues. If you're looking at buying a chateau, there has to be some understanding that thermally it's not probably going to be exceptional, or if you do want it to be exceptional, it's going to be a long process to get there, and it's going to be quite expensive to do it. It can be done, but it's quite a challenge to get a large chateau. The more compact they are, the easier it is. Large surface areas never help, never a good thing when it comes to thermal performance. And quite a few of these chateaux aren't small, right? So it's definitely something which people should be aware of. But I don't think necessarily if they're looking at chateaux for purchase, it should be the top of the list of, I want an A-rated chateau, because you might be looking for a very long time.
I remember one time, it was quite a few years back already, there was a really nice manor house for sale. Basically livable, but for renovation and priced right. French couple bullshit, went in there and they put white PVC double glazed windows all the way through it. It's like, I said, you got the odd doing that? He says, yeah. I said, right, well, it's cheaper. It's like, yeah, even so.
Yeah. But I think there's different. It's interesting working with clients from international. Because they have different ideas about what they want their buildings internally as well as externally to be. And quite often, my sensibilities, Anglo-Saxon sensibilities, are a certain style, certain taste, which sometimes kind of
a certain level, let's say.
Yeah, a certain level, certain slams into others where I guess the aspiration for the property is slightly different. It's it's more about making sure it's thermally efficient, and rather than kind of sacrificing the aesthetic perhaps. But sometimes you drive past a few of these and kind of wince a bit and go, oh man, I know why you did it, but really, do we have to do that? Yeah, I mean, I dread to think what the some members of the Architectes Bâtiments de France think of these of the works to some of these buildings. But it's the 70s and 80s were not a happy place for chateaux in France.
Certainly. Well, going back to the Architectes Bâtiments de France thing with the listed buildings, I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but I think it's only about something like 14% of chateaux are actually listed.
Yeah, it's not many, but when they are, man, are they? It can be a real challenge. We're working on Château down, foothills of the Pyrenees at the moment, and it's a registered monument historique. It's incredibly old, attached to a church that was also incredibly old, and everything down to removing ivy from the walls, that kind of stuff, has to be run past the ABF first to make sure they are happy with what's going on. It's a challenge. They're not all like that, because the same client owns another one in the lot, and the external fabric of the building.
His second home, is it, the other one?
A third home, actually. The external fabric of the building on that one is the only part which is listed. The internals, not the ABF don't care, but they're not of quality enough for it to be listed, so they can get on with anything internally, which makes life slightly easier. So it can be a challenge, but there's not many, as you rightly say, there's not many that are actually listed. They might have a local heritage protection on it, so the local planners or the local mairie or whoever are kind of interested in what you're doing, but actually internally there's not much regulation on what can be done. Again, sometimes, unfortunately, but it's not. I don't think you can kind of automatically say, I'm looking at a chateau, it's going to be listed, because actually probably isn't.
Yeah, because I know in the UK it probably is, whereas in France it probably isn't.
Yeah, the difference is dramatic. Yeah.
And another thing that makes me laugh as well is often when reading information about chateaux is sometimes partially listed. The fireplace and the west tower is listed. The rest of it isn't. It's like, okay.
Yeah, although it's one of those misnomers, isn't it? Because the fireplace and the west tower might be listed, but because the rest of the building is attached to both of those things which are listed, it means that the whole of it is actually covered. So it's a bit of a funny thing. But sometimes they'll go, actually the chateau itself isn't particularly interesting, but this 14th century fireplace, which has somehow survived whatever's happened to the rest of the building, is quite interesting. So we'll just list that. And at that point, it kind of you get the blanket listing over the whole building. And sometimes you look at these buildings, and there will have been a 1980s extension off the side of it, and purely because it's attached to this building with a fireplace in it, it has a protection accidentally kind of on top of it, which means trying to do anything like get rid of it, for instance, ends up being really really difficult. But it's chateaus are funny buildings. It is true that you drive around the French countryside and look at buildings, you kind of go, oh, automatically, oh, that must be listed and protected. And actually, it's probably not. No. So they're a bit of a funny beast when it comes to that.
Yeah, there's actually France is quite funny on several levels because I think there's 3 times more laws in the UK, but you wouldn't think so when you're there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I can well believe it.
Also, talking about the actual listed building side, I think one thing that's worth mentioning as well is actually the perimeter of listed buildings. If someone even buys a normal house within 500 meters of a listed building, or a listed cross, or a listed whatever, then you come under the Architecte Bâtiment de France as well.
Yeah, and there's so many folks who want to do very, very simple things like change windows, for instance, going back to UPVC windows, just want to simply replace 40, 50-year-old windows with new double glazed units, and and do the right thing, submit their simple application, and suddenly they get a raft of direction from the ABF going, yes, it has to be this color and this material and this style and this, and you kind of go, they come to us going, why are they even commenting? This is just a very regular cottage.
Exactly.
And you look at the maps and you go, yep, but you're within 300 meters of or 500 meters of a protected building, and therefore that's their jurisdiction. They can have their say. And it's sometimes the line can be between two attached buildings, and your neighbor is outside and doesn't get affected, and so can do what they want, and you're inside the line and suddenly have this prescriptions from the ABF, which means suddenly the windows get more expensive or it all gets more complicated. I kind of understand what they do and why they do it in order, it's that protection of built heritage. France is famous for its built heritage, and it's one of the reasons lots of people want to come and visit and live. And so there is an element of protection, and the ABF officers who we work with are very rarely anti-development. They're not there just to say no, but they're definitely there to, they have their mandate for protection, and they're definitely there to fill that. It can definitely be a struggle, and especially if you're not expecting it, if it comes up as a surprise, because as you say, the most random things can be listed.
Completely.
Crosses, bridges,
water towers.
Yeah, exactly. It seems sometimes a bit random, but it does have an impact on the properties within that 500 meter perimeter.
Yeah, even if you're a chateau or just a normal bungalow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're buying a chateau, you kind of go, okay, well, maybe I'll expect that. I'll expect it, and it's a bonus if it doesn't come along. But if you're buying a little bungalow and kind of suddenly you want to do a small extension or change your windows or do something simple, and suddenly you're getting reams of paperwork back from this it's a strange person from the ABF. It can seem a bit confusing as to what my building's not listed. Why are they bothered by what I'm doing?
Yeah,
but it's another joy of French bureaucracy.
Oh, completely. There's quite a few of them. Most people who contact you, they'll contact you usually once they've found a place. Well, 2 questions actually. The first question is, do you think that's the right way, or should they talk to you first?
I would love them to come and talk to me first. I would love it. It would be the best thing ever, because we end up, we can guide people if they come to us early and say, look, I found this property, I'm interested in it. Here's the plans for it. Here's what ideal, 5 years time, when all the work's done, I want to be sipping rosé on my veranda, looking over this view with the house in this state. And you kind of go, right, well, we can look at how that might work, both in terms of the building. So, what needs to happen to the building to make that happen, but also in terms of planning regulations and zoning and the ABF and all that fun stuff. Because we can have that, and you can have the hard conversations with someone before they financially committed to something. Because if they purchase it, and then you're having those hard conversations, it becomes difficult. Because the other thing, I think people need to understand that the purchasing process in France isn't quite the same as it is in other countries, funnily enough. And so just understanding that in order to do due diligence on a house, you're kind of almost left to your own devices. It's up to you to find out as much information about the house as possible. Whereas in the US, you might have a buyer's agent, you might have a real estate attorney, you might have a home inspector, all working for you almost from the get-go. As soon as you kind of even think about having an interest in the property, they're all kind of set up. And it's the same in the UK. You've got your conveyancing solicitors and surveyors all there to kind of look after your side of the deal, to make sure the property's going to work for you. You can talk to them about here's what we want to do. And there's also a kind of a built-in understanding of, if you want to extend the property in the UK, you just automatically know that there's going to be a planning application or there's going to be some kind of paperwork. And equally in the US, in terms of zoning laws and construction permits and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of a known entity. We find quite often people in France assume that because there's a notaire and because there's an agent, and suddenly all, kind of this due diligence they want to do on a property kind of happens automatically. And with great agents, it often does. The agents, we work with lots of agents who come to us and go, I've got this client interested in this property. They want to do X. Can we can we check it out so that we can facilitate the sale in the most efficient way possible? Because it's way easier to have a difficult conversation with someone, as I said, kind of before they commit to something, rather than telling someone, you've bought this great house, but actually the zoning doesn't allow you to do what you want to do with it. And then it's about trying to shoehorn a solution into something which doesn't quite fit. Whereas if we've worked through that early on, you can manage their expectations to go, okay, well, we can't do plan A, but we can definitely look at plan B. Will that do? And it allows them to kind of go into a property purchase decision with some confidence that actually, on day one, if they wanted to, we can get the design done, file the permissions, get it all off and rolling. Because the other thing that's happening quite a lot at the moment is that zoning regulations and planning policy is changing underneath people's ownership. So the government, in their infinite wisdom, about 4 years ago, introduced this law which should limit the amount of virgin land, agricultural land, natural land that is developable in each commune. So voisin is the law. And what's that done is where communes are writing their planning policies, they've shrunk the developable area. So there's kind of what is constructible, what they're considering as parcels of land that be considered for development, down to just the urban, like the center of a village or a collection of existing buildings. And it's kind of left all these isolated plots out in agricultural and natural zones. And quite often, especially if there's second homes or people aren't quite as up to speed with what's going on in the commune as perhaps they should be, these zonings happen without them knowing. They'll have a plan. Perhaps they've done a CU 5 years ago, and that was approved then. They come to do it again 5 years later down the road, and suddenly everyone's saying no. And it's sometimes it's the end of the world. Unfortunately we've had a few clients who have bought building parcels which have been constructible when they bought it, and suddenly aren't constructible anymore. And it's a very, I don't like having those conversations. It's just unfortunate that I find out the information and have to deliver the bad news. And you can't do anything about it, I guess, if it happens, if you own it. But if you're looking and searching for a property and think there is going to be some development potential, or it's a renovation job, or you're thinking about adding a pool or whatever it is, it's easier to do the research and the due diligence on the house before you own it, because then at least you can decide whether, if the answers aren't absolutely yes, you can decide whether that's going to be working for you or not. So I'd much rather people come to me pre-purchase than post-purchase. And we can do it post-purchase. It just ends up, we do a lot of those, but it'd be way easier.
Also, another thing to remember on the actual, especially on chateaux, for example, although the normal purchase duration is 3 to 4 months for a normal house, for a chateau, it's usually 6, 9, 12 months for the sale to go through. So there is more time to actually prepare these things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't sometimes clients want surety, right, on what their plans are, and they want they won't just trust me reading the planning regulations. They want some authority to say yes, it's possible. We often submit what's called a certificate urbanisme during the purchase process. So once the compromis de vente is signed, there's a suspension clause written into the compromis which says we're going to submit a CU for X, whatever the development is. If the CU comes back and it's got a positive response, great, we'll carry on. If it comes back and we can't do it, well, then it's a decision-making point, isn't it? You kind of either decide that you want to carry on with the purchase, and you kind of write off the suspensive clause and go, okay, we know we can't do it, but we're going to carry on with the purchase anyway. Or yeah, we do it now. Or we say we'll cut our losses and go out. And generally speaking, we can get that done within the normal kind of purchase process range, 3 to 4 months. The chateau work is just by definition more complicated, and there's more stakeholders involved usually, so it takes slightly longer. But it's often the case that we can apply, get it all done in. If you're spending north of €1 million or 1.5 million euros, getting the paperwork and bureaucracy done, and we often do full planning applications if the vendors allow it to happen within that period, to make sure that the new owners can start on the work as soon as they own it. It's it can definitely be done. I think that period between the compromis devant signing and the acte de vente is a very useful period. But also, if you can take some time between offer and compromis, that 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe period, to try and get as much information about the house as possible. It means that you can go through the 10-day cooling off period without having to rush and kind of go, I really want to find out X, Y, and Z. If you go armed with a few lists of questions, or know who to ask, to say, can you come and have a look, or can we research this? Here's the property, is a useful thing to do, because the French property process, the length of time is really handy in terms of finding out as much information as you can. And agents can be really helpful. They can be really useful. Leaning on them to.
Some can be really bad.
Well, some of them can be, and it's you're always going to get the odd one that is less than helpful, but
more interested in the sale than the actual job. Say.
Yeah, you do get. Yeah, it does happen. I think there's sometimes you can get an indication of what kind of side of the coin your agent's on quite early on, about even just asking simple questions about the answers and responses you get. I mean, sometimes they're led by the vendors a little, in that we just want to get it done and out the door. But it's definitely worthwhile asking as many questions as you can, and finding out as much information as you can, and using the process to your advantage, because it's definitely worth doing it, especially if you're buying a 1.5 million euro chateau.
Yeah, well, I'll get on to the questions in a minute, but just want to come back on the certificate of urbanism. I take it you're talking about what we call, all the French people call CUs, certificate of urbanism opérationnel, which is actually quite a detailed description of the project. So it can be put in as a suspensive clause into the purchase. So it does come back refused. You can actually pull out of the purchase as well.
We often suggest them when the proposal for the project is not completely aligned with the policies. So we'll here's client comes to us and says, I want to do this. Here's the house. It looks great, but here's a barn I want to convert. Or with a chateau, there's lots of outbuildings. We want to use the outbuildings for this. If we look at the regs and go, yeah, I can't tell you absolutely yes, but I can't absolutely tell you no either, that's when a CUB comes in really handy, because we can ask the powers that be and the writers of those policies to give us an opinion. The CU isn't an approval, legally binding opinion for a duration, for a period of time, but it's a really powerful tool in giving you some confidence, and in the purchase process. Because if it comes back and the planners say a flat no, then you kind of go, well, fine, well, I'll pull out of the process. But I mean, CU, there's two types to start with. There's a CUA, which is quite useful for me, but not useful for any other people, because it's just a description of the planning policies which exist on the property and that kind of thing, but doesn't give you you don't ask a specific question. So you're not asking the planners, can I convert this outbuilding? Just tell me about the property, and they'll give you a list of stuff. And whilst it's handy for me to look at, I can usually find out that information anyway. A CUB, as you say, is a specific. You're asking a specific question. I want to convert this outbuilding into a gîte or an event space or something like that, and the planners review that request against planning policy and give you a very often quite detailed answer whether this thing is feasible or not. Which means that one, if you're submitting a planning application, you can use that in the application to go, look, you said it was possible. when we were looking, but so therefore the answer should be the same. We haven't tried to do anything else. But it also gives you that confidence thing that the project's delayed by 6 months once you own it, and it's still going to be possible. The one thing I guess to note on them is they only last for 18 months. So the validity is 18 months. So if your project is coming out, if you end up going for planning permission after 18 months, you can't necessarily rely on the CU. If the planning policies haven't changed in those 18 months, then it's likely the answer will be the same, because they'll be answering the same question based on the same policies. But if the policy and regulations have changed in those 18 months, it's important to understand that, because you'll be asking the same question against a different set of rules, and the answer might be different.
Which makes you think, I've often seen properties being sold and the owner's going, oh, but I've got planning permission for that, to do that, so you can go ahead and do it. It's like, no.
No, well, you can transfer the permission. You can do it. There is a process. It has to be done. It's usually done at the point where the sale happens. But essentially, a planning permission in France doesn't rest with the property. It rests on the person. So a person has planning permission to do work to a property. If you're buying a property that has an existing permission, you need to make sure that permission gets transferred to you. And if your plans to change those permissions, you're only permitted to do the work in the permission. If you want to modify them, you have to modify it. And it's a process. So you have to transfer the permission, then you have to modify the permission, then you have to, there's a whole process of admin to do, which is, totally un-French.
Which is probably just as easy as doing new permissions.
So sometimes, and it make it sound really difficult. It's not difficult at all. It's just, it's typically French. There's typically a process to go through. And sometimes one process is one way and 15 stages, and another process which delivers you to the same point will only be six stages. So let's choose that one, shall we?
Exactly. And coming back to the questions, here's one for you. Someone's going to see a chateau. What would you say are the top 3 or 5 questions they should be asking?
I would be asking. I'd always tell people to go and ask about the roof. Find out as much information about the roofs. Chateau roofs are notoriously expensive to fix. Don't necessarily just rely on the diagnostics, because you get the diagnostic reports are interesting, and they'll tell you some information, but they don't tell you about the fabric of the building.
But limited.
And so finding out about the fabric of the building is key. And also, if you get the diagnostics before you go and see it, or between seeing it, getting diagnostics, and then go and see it again. If there's anything in the diagnostics which are flagged, so for instance, the presence of termites, or it's in a subsidence, geo-risk zone, going again and going, right, so there's termites identified. Where are they? Where has it been identified? Has it affected the structure? No. Is there evidence that the building's moved? Because the building can be in a subsidence zone. Doesn't mean it's subsided. It just, and equally, it can be in a subsidence zone and have subsided a lot. The geo-risk report will just tell you it's in the zone, not that it's actually moved. So finding out the fabric of the building is good. Whether the fosse is conforming, because notoriously, chateaus are on fosse systems, and they're generally very big because of the number of bedrooms associated with chateaus. The chateau, the fosse system design is based upon potential occupancy, and so if the chateau's massive, the potential occupancy of chateaus are huge. So if the fosse systems end up being quite sizable too, and especially if you hear that the fosse is 30 years old and it's non-compliant. Well, okay, a 30-year-old non-compliant fosse is probably not what that's depending on what the size is. If you're having to put in a fosse that's going to cater for 50 people, that can be quite a significant piece of work to do. And so finding that information out is always useful. Finding out about any protections, I'd instantly ask whether it's a monument historique or if there's one in the area. If there's plans and if there's outbuildings and you have plans, or if you're just thinking about extending, adding, doing anything, developing the building in any way, I would find out what planning zone it's in, what the regs say, whether it's got any special policies, because sometimes we're working on a chateau at the moment which has its very own planning zone. It's within a wider planning zone, but it's got its own planning zone, and they've written policies specifically for it. And so it's no good doing, it's in zone N. Okay, great. But the policies that the in zone N don't apply to this building. There's specific ones written for it. It's not a listed building. They've covered it off by being specific in the PLU, which is quite interesting. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And so finding out about that And then I guess trying to get a steer on what the potential renovation or development costs might be. It's a very difficult, I mean, thumb in the air. No chateau is the same. I've seen a number of people recently say, "Oh, you can renovate a gutter chateau and renovate it for €1,000 a square meter," and it's a little bit light.
If you
Yeah,
ban,
it's a little bit like we haven't had any pricing come back for any job in France in the last 18 months for less than €1,200 a square meter, and that's in the cheapest part of France for the lightest amount of work. Chateaus are normal. We always look at a range of 1,600 to €2,200 a square meter for renovation work, and some the chateaus aren't. They're individual things. They're so often so complex in their size and just the volumes. A regular board of plasterboard does not cut it. In a chateau, ceiling heights will require a board and a half, 2 boards, and so as soon as you do that, suddenly your plasterboarding prices go out the window. You can't just base them on normal ones. So it's that kind of thing that we can answer those questions in a broad sense to say, we think here's the range of the pricing we think it's going to be based on the scope, based on the building, based on the region, because regionally French construction costs are wildly different. So many people who start these renovation chateau projects and they end up running out of money 2/3 of the way through, a third of the way through, and that's not fun. Living in a half-finished chateau when you had the dream of a fairy tale chateau, when you first started, it's not a good thing, and quite often it comes down to the budget not matching the aspiration.
And one thing as well, which is whether it be a house or a chateau, whatever, I've certainly seen it a lot in houses, heard about it once or twice in chateaus where they've run out of the budget. Basically, when it comes to reselling the property afterwards, you're selling an unrenovated property.
Yeah.
So let's say you buy it for €1 million and you do €300,000 in work in it, and you still haven't finished. As far as the eye of the buyer is concerned, it's still worth €1 million.
Yeah, well, I think that has to come into the conversation as well in terms of the return on investment and the potential values of the property when you have renovated it. It's not necessarily, you've got to get out of the kind of the US UK mindset that €1 in equals €5 out in terms of the values at the end.
Wish.
It's sometimes €1 in gets you 50 cents out at the end. It's not quite that bad, but you're not likely to flip a chateau for a profit. And so it's all about, yes, renovate it to your taste, and so you can live in it and enjoy it, and or renovate it so it can be let out, or renovate it so it can be a business. You can use it for event spaces or weddings or whatever you want to use it for. The idea that you can just renovate them, put them back on the market, and sell them for a profit doesn't really work in the French property market, and I think that also has to go into the decision making process. It's about being a guardian of the building for the period of time you own it, and improving it, because everyone wants to leave a house as better than when they found it, and living in it in a nice way and enjoying it and all that kind of stuff. And so therefore, if you have the budget to do that, great. There are bargains to be found, but they take a huge amount of work to get them, to a saleable position. And even then, whether you make the kind of emotional cost back, I don't know. It's one of those. But I guess that's also has to play part of the decision making.
I think also another thing people need to consider when talking about prices and return on investment is local property prices. Just obviously keeping the figures simple. You're buying a chateau for €1 million, and you're putting 500,000 into it. Then would it be worth 1.5 on the local market? So quite often local markets can't support that sort of price.
No, exactly. And I think you've got it's making your. We have got lots of conversation with people about making their renovation budget work very hard for them. So doing the things which are going to make the most money, but both improve the building the most for the least amount of expenditure, but also those things usually are things which increase the value the most for the return on investment on specific things is usually better. At the moment you must be seeing it as well. There's a kind of more properties coming on the market which are GF rated because of the issues with thermal, and you can't rent them out for long-term rents and all that kind of stuff. So it's possible to find these properties which are, cheaper than they perhaps should be. But it's improving the thermal performance of these things. You don't necessarily always have to go with what the DPE tells you is the best thing to do, because they'll put sometimes the DPE will tell you there's some crazy figures banded around for this. You can get it up to level A, and it's going to cost you €200,000. And I only bought the house for 75. Why on earth would I do that? And it's that kind of, but there are some things you can do which will take it up to a level D, which is much better than a level G. For not that much money, and suddenly you've got something which is more saleable. So it's about working hard and coming up with feasibility and making sure projects aren't just aesthetic. Okay, have crazy ideas, but there's usually a crazy budget against crazy ideas. So just making sure the budget matches, because also doing things which are likely to appeal to a wider market is often a good thing to do. We had an inquiry recently for a guy who wanted to convert lots of outbuildings in the chateau into a commercial recording studio. Wonderful idea. And we're talking to them going, how long do you think this is going to be a recording studio? How long are you going to want to operate it as such? They said, 15, 20 years. I was like, well, what happens to it after that? Because the people looking for a commercial recording studio in a chateau, it's not a massive market, and you kind of go and you
maybe, but not massive.
It's quite a small pool, and if you're doing that, it's about renovating those buildings sensibly and cleverly, so that you can use them as recording studio, but then you could also reuse them as something else. Turn them into sheets or whatever it is. So it's not just having that idea. And I think speaking to folks like us and informed agents and those kind of things about your ideas early on allows you to either kind of understand that all the things that you didn't necessarily think about that perhaps might cause a problem in 10 years' time, not necessarily just on day one, is worthwhile. Because there's lots and lots of projects we've got at the minute which are for regularization applications, because folks have done work to properties 10 years ago or inherited problems when they bought them, and 10 years ago notaires may not have been quite as rigorous with their due diligence, perhaps. But now they seem to be. Notaires these days seem to be really hot on, has there been any work done? Have there been any changes? Does the description of when you bought it match, the description you're selling it? Or even, does it match the previous kind of description? They go back quite a long way. And the number of regularization applications we're getting when people are selling their properties going, the notaire said, we need approval for this, that, and the other. Usually it's because they didn't know they needed approval, or they've inherited it and gone, the previous owners did it and we didn't know, it was never picked up. And so it's that kind of thing which can cause stresses in a property ownership where you didn't think there would be any. And I think if you can kill those, if you can get rid of those right at the start before you've even committed to something, then it's going to be, it's an easy ride. You're on to winner.
So basically, to summarise, let's say,
probably plan ahead, but also try and speak to the right people. I think that's that's also. I think there's lots of folks out there who are perfectly happy to help you out and point in the right direction. And you don't necessarily have to go through it alone. I think that's the big thing as well.
There's one thing we haven't mentioned, which is a bit of a grey area in French law, are surveyors.
Yes.
Yeah, because obviously you know a lot about buildings, but you're not actually qualified as a surveyor.
No. So,
we've mentioned the geognostics, which is a kind of survey, but different. Geognostics are more on numbers, let's say, where surveyors is actual personal opinion, let's say.
I guess the French don't recognise them as a profession. It's a bit harsh to say they don't recognise them as a profession, but they don't really exist in the French property purchase process, do they? They're not.
It's not in the legal system.
They're not a player in that process at the moment. However, a French buyer, if there is a building which they think they're going to renovate or needs work or whatever, they will take along a builder or a friend who knows about buildings to give them an idea of, the roof looks okay, or the windows need work, or there's a crack which needs more investigation. Now, if you're buying internationally, you don't have that person on the ground, and so having someone like a surveyor to go along and write a report, review the building, write a report, and if they're writing it as, say, a RICS level 3, so in the UK, there's a set kind of criteria of things and regulation which they have to adhere to within the report. The problem, I think, comes when there isn't necessarily the analysis of the report against the building and against the feasibility, against the project.
Right.
So we get our reports. If a client has had a survey done, we'll ask for it, because what we can do is identify what's the report said, because it's factual, but it's also opinion to an extent, and just kind of guide them and go, well, okay, it says the roofs needs work. Well, does it need replacing? Or can we just get around it by replacing a few tiles? Does it affect what you want to do with it? Can you leave it for 5 years? There's a whole conversation around the report and making sure that people understand it. Because again, it can just be another, 70 pages in a pack of 300 pages it can be information overload. I mean, when it comes to high value purchases, chateaus, older buildings, then yes, there's a place for it, I think, to understand, because it not only does it give you an idea of the building, but also if you're renovating it, it gives you an idea of where the problems are within the existing building that you have to allocate budget to. That's kind of useful.
Yep.
If it's for a newer building, say, and there's nothing obvious, you kind of go, well, you can do it for peace of mind, but it's peace of mind. It's not necessarily. You could be spending the money on it, and the report come back saying the building's fine. And there's no, okay, you've got the peace of mind, but it's cost you however much it costs, and possibly slow down the process. So,
same time, well, as you probably know, there's a bit of a love-hate relationship between estate agents and surveyors.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think on normal houses, you don't really need to worry about it too much. On a building like a chateau, I would actually suggest it, because it might be €3,000 to €5,000 investment, but something going wrong on a chateau isn't like £100 to repair it.
No, it can save you a huge amount of money, and if it turns out that you spend £5,000 on a survey, and on the back of the survey you decide to not carry on with the £1.5 million purchase. If there's obviously something in the survey which has highlighted that, it could have saved you 200,000, 300,000 euros in costs associated with just getting the building working as a building, rather kind of forget about developing it or doing anything like that. Getting the building back to zero, and so it's a worthwhile investment. It's an insurance policy at the end of the day, and you everyone begrudges paying insurance bills and premiums, but it's just something you do
till the day you need it.
Exactly, to protect you. So it's there can be some misunderstanding about what surveyors do and the potential benefit they bring to a purchase. I also think that there tends to need to be a link between purchasers and the report they produce sometimes. A bit of analysis into that. Also, I think that sometimes, especially if it's a French vendor and an international purchaser, there can be some friction there because the French vendor isn't expecting a survey. And sometimes they can view it as a slight on them that you don't trust them, and sometimes it can not ruin the relationship. Just kind of sometimes the vendor can get a little bit sensitive to it because it's the French are very private people, and it's someone coming in and invasively inspecting the building, their house, and so it's sometimes solve problems.
Saying that though, I find it goes down a lot easier with people who own big properties, i.e. manors and chateaus. I think they understand that pretty well almost anyone can't actually judge a building just by walking around it when it's that sort of size. So having an expert come in,
exactly, And I think when you come into chateaus, manoirs, large farmhouses, anything of a substantial size, then getting a third party to go in and spend a day, 2 days, or however long it takes to go around and thoroughly inspect it is worth the money to do, especially if you then balance it with feasibility studies or processes to do due diligence. It can really be quite a useful tool. There's probably a financial line. I guess there's a value line where it's worthwhile and where it's not worthwhile. So I guess to be honest with you as well, it's each to their own. Because if someone's buying a property, for 200,000 euros and they only have 200,000 euros to spend, so there's no renovation budget, there's not, they want to know that they can just move in and there's no work to do, then it might be worth spending £2,000 on a survey. If you're spending 200 grand and you've got a pot of 2 million euros sitting around, then maybe it doesn't matter whether the roof needs replacing or whatever. No one wants to spend money
unnecessary,
without reason unnecessarily. But there's definitely a personal situation. Everyone has their own personal situation, I guess, to deal with, and you have to make a decision. The opportunity to do it is there. There are surveyors who will come and do surveys, so that you can get one done. You just have to make a decision whether it's what you think is worthwhile.
Exactly. And I wouldn't say take it with a pinch of bread what they give you, but actually read through it, because I think that's probably where a lot of the bugbear comes between agents and surveyors. Is surveyors literally hand the file over afterwards. I've seen several cases. Oh, the house is riddled with woodworm. No, it just says it's got woodworm on one beam, and it's not even actually the whole beam.
I think sometimes we do a reasonable amount, kind of that analysis of the surveyor's report to identify the major problems, the not so bad problems, and the problems which are identified which can be left for 10 years.
And also the very easily solvable ones.
Yeah, exactly. And how that affects it. It's, as you say, the report arrives and people look through it. And people are always eager just to whip to the conclusion and go, what's it say? Without actually reading any of the detail, which is, understandable. But it's, definitely worthwhile having that analysis done on it, just to make sure that you're aware what it actually says, rather than just the conclusion.
Well, we're coming up for pretty well an hour of talking, believe it or not.
Yeah, blimey.
And so, to round up, if people want to contact you, obviously I'll put the details down in the description.
Yeah.
But what's the best way?
Easiest way is via the website. So frenchplans.com is the website address. We're on all social, so Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Look out for the new YouTube channel, which is coming soon, where we'll post a load of info and stuff like that. But yeah, if people could contact me early on, that would be wonderful. If they could get to me, if they have any idea, if looking at a property and there's any element of the thought of development, or if there's conversion work to do, or they're thinking about chateau conversion into wedding events venues and things like that, then I think drop me a line and we can have a chat. Perfectly happy to talk about a project in the first instance to see if we can help, and point people in the right direction of others who can help them. So we definitely try to be a resource.
Okay, well, Tom, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
And no doubt see you soon.
Yeah, speak to you
soon. Doing the Manchester show, Birmingham show?
We are doing all the shows this year, yes. So,
okay, well, I'll see you there then.
Are you doing Birmingham?
French Property Exhibition.
Yeah, Birmingham, yeah.
Okay, well, Tom, thanks a lot. And hopefully speak soon.
Yeah, speak soon.